Hello again and welcome to another Mage Tower guide. This time we're going to be going over the Arcane Mage. So as always, we're going to start off with our consumables. We're going to need Flasks of the Whispered Pact, Potions of Prolonged Power, and a haste food of some kind. Moving on to talents, in the first row we're going to want Amplification. The other two talents aren't very good in a general basis anyway. In the next row, we're going to want Mana Shield, unless you have Belovir's Final Stand, which is a legendary, in which case you can take Shimmer. I think it'd be better in that situation. Mana Shield is a very different playstyle than you might be used to, so I will talk about that a little bit more as we go. In the next tier, we're going to take Incanter's Flow. Rune of Power is the normal go-to, but seeing as how much moving we're going to have to do in this challenge, it'll be really hard to get full value out of a Rune of Power. Moving on, I used Resonance in the next tier as it is the most versatile of the talents in this row, and it is also the most easy to use. In the next tier, I went with Chrono Shift as this gives you both a movement speed increase and a slow, which will be extremely useful in this challenge. In the next tier, I went with Erosion, which is kind of the normal pick for most situations. However, I think you can make a case for Unstable Magic, especially if you're trying to play things safe and not worrying about having to keep up your stacks of Erosion at all times. And finally, in the last tier, I went with Arcane Orb. This gives you the most flexibility as you can use it to quickly gain arcane charges, or you can use it at max arcane charges to do a large amount of AoE damage. Overall, I felt like this beat out Overpowered, but if you want to try Overpowered and you are a better Arcane Mage player than I am, feel free to try that instead. Now, one additional thing I feel compelled to add here is that having some way of passively healing is extremely valuable. I don't like talking about gearing in a specific way because at this point in the expansion, you should be able to kill it without having to specifically gear for anything, but I did go back and when I was watching this kill, I noticed I was getting a significant amount of healing from just one of my relics, which happened to have Shadowbind on it, which is a Netherlight Crucible trait. If you have some way to guarantee some sort of passive healing, it will help out immensely. So it doesn't have to be one of the legendaries, you don't have to grind for one of those, and I only had one trait that had Shadowbind on it, so just keep that in mind, that Netherlight traits such as Shadowbind, Secure in the Light, Infusion of Light, even Reflective Shield are extremely good for this challenge. So do keep those things in mind as well, even just having one of these will be extremely valuable. But with all that being said, let's quickly go over the mechanics of this fight. So in this challenge, we'll be facing off against 3 enemies. The first one we'll cover is Sigrid. She has 4 abilities, and the first one we'll talk about is Blood of the Father. This is her huge damaging ability that you will need to polymorph her in order to survive it. This will be the first priority whenever you see it come out. The next ability she has is Throw Spear. She will throw a spear somewhere on the ground, which will leave these green puddles on the ground that you'll have to make sure you're not standing in. Her next ability is Dark Wings. This will be a wall of Valkyr that will spawn on one of the sides of the room, and then they will rush across. There will be a hole in the middle of the wall that you can get through and not take damage, so you'll need to make sure that you're positioning yourself in a way where you'll be slipping between the Valkyr. And finally, her last ability is Advance. She will quickly use this ability to rush at you and knock you back, so make sure that you are not using evocation before she does this. A good time to plan out your evocation is when she is polymorphed or when she has just finished using an advance. The next enemy we'll talk about is Yarrow Vel. He has 3 abilities, the first of which we'll talk about is Berserker's Rage. This is something he'll cast on himself, increasing his damage by a ton. You will need to make sure that you're keeping him at a distance at all times, as if he gets too close to you, he will quickly start chopping away at your health. The next ability that he has is called Hurl Axe. These are axes that he will just throw out towards you. They do have a clear telegraph and you can dodge them, however most of the time it's not worth it as it just requires too much moving. And his final ability is Blade Storm. This is something that he will announce and cast, and then begin sucking you in towards the center of his Blade Storm the closer you are to him. You'll want to make sure that you're moving out of this as fast as possible, as this does a lot of damage as well. And the last enemy we have to deal with is Rune Seer Faljar. He has two abilities, the first of which is a Shadow Bolt that just does a small amount of damage, and Ancestral Knowledge. When he casts Ancestral Knowledge, he will put an Absorb Shield on himself that you'll have to break through in order to actually interrupt the cast. If he manages to get this off, he will do a large amount of damage to you, so make sure that if this is going to happen, that you have your Ice Block ready. We also have two environmental mechanics that we'll need to watch out for, the first of which is Runic Detonation. These are these runes that will spawn around the center of the room. You will have to run over them to keep them from exploding. If they do go off, they will do a ton of damage to you as well. And the other one we'll have to look out for are these orbs that will spawn around the room. If you run over them, they will recover a significant portion of your health, which will be extremely useful in managing your health during this encounter. So those are all the mechanics we're going to be seeing, so now we'll see how it all fits together in my kill of this fight. So bear with me as I'm going to be speaking fairly quickly as there's a lot going on in the next 4 to 5 minutes of this fight. So I'm going to make sure that my mana shield is active. I'm going to start off with an Arcane Blast with my Arcane Orb. I'm going to move behind them, pop my Time Warp, my Overpower, and then start spamming Arcane Explosion, as well as throwing in my Mark of Aluneth as well. The reason why I want to do this right here, especially with Arcane Explosion, is because all three of their health pools are linked. So Arcane Explosion, or any kind of AoE, is going to be extremely effective, especially early on with your cooldowns. As you can see, I've already done a significant amount of damage right at the start. So when Yarrow Vel uses his Berserker's Rage, I'm basically just going to be getting a charge of Arcane and then using Barrage to enact my Chrono Shift. I found this strategy to be better than using Slow, but you can use Slow as well if you need a little bit extra to slow him down. Here, Advance kind of messed me up, and I went for the wrong rune, which will then cause me to miss this one, so you can see how much damage that puts out. It's quite a bit, so if you can, really try to make sure you get all of them, as you will wipe fairly quickly if you don't. So here's the first Blood of the Father, so I'm going to quickly use my Polymorph on Sigrid, get the last rune right here, and now I'm going to focus most of my attention on just trying to do single target damage to Rune Seer Faljar. So you can see I'm already pretty low on mana, and I probably should have just gone ahead and used Evocation here, but I'm trying to save what's left of my mana to break his Shield of Ancestral Knowledge when that does come out. Another thing that I'm noticing is that I'm just moving around too much. Again, I was trying to position myself well when I didn't really need to, as well as dodge some of those axes. Again, I just don't feel like that's extremely necessary. So here's the first Ancestral Knowledge. I have my charges of Arcane Missiles, which I'm going to use, and as you can see how effective that is in breaking the shield. And then as soon as that's done, I'm going to try to get a little bit more damage out before I interrupt it, and then pay attention to where the Wall of Death was right there from those Valkyr. So here I've got them kind of grouped up a little bit, and this will be a good time to use my Evocation, but fortunately I noticed that there was going to be a Blade Storm coming in, so I got out of that as quick as I could. So here's another Blood of the Father, then another Polymorph, and I'm staying right on the edge of this Blade Storm because I still want to keep them fairly grouped up. But in this stage here, I'm going to basically get one charge of Arcane and then immediately use it to move myself around for getting all these runes, as we will get a couple runes in a row. So here's another situation where I get my charges, I use my Barrage, and then quickly run around the room getting the runes on the ground. So here I just went ahead and slowed him just to keep him off me. And now I'm going to move around over here to start working on the Ancestral Knowledge. And also avoid the Wall of Valkyr. So now that all those mechanics have passed, I can really start focusing in on breaking the shield. And as I use my Arcane Missiles again right there, and then interrupt the cast. So here's another good situation where I can use my Evocation, and I use it right there. And again, you want to try to use Evocation in a situation where you can be close to all three, as that also does an AoE explosion right as it finishes. So again, I'm going to use my Barrage to get the speed boost, put the slow on Velbrand, and also just do damage to all three. And now I'm just going to kind of focus on keeping my distance here. And again, I think it's just the easiest way to handle it is with Barrage and Chrono Shift. Make my way around the room, barely missed that rune again. So as you can see, it's very, very important to try to get all of the runes. Here's another Blade Storm and Blood of the Father. Barely able to get that polymorph off. I was a little bit late reacting, but I was also trying to get out of the Blade Storm. So again, in these phases where you have to have Sigrid polymorphed, I basically default to attacking Faljar, as he does eventually cast the Ancestral Knowledge, and it's just easier if you're already attacking him. So one thing that I've noticed, I think I might have mentioned it already, but I just move around too much. You should be not worrying about moving around or getting away from Yarrow Vel unless he has the Berserker Rage on him, as you're going to be taking a lot of passive damage anyway, and you can't really do much if you're moving around. So I would instead focus on getting your position set up, and then not worrying about moving around so much. It's just a lot of bit of extra that I did that you don't really need to do. So here comes another Ancestral Knowledge. I'll be trying to pump in as much damage as I can, which I was able to break it fairly easy as I had full charges, and again waiting for the last possible moment, or at least close to it, before breaking it. Unfortunately, I had to cancel my evocation there, just because I needed to make sure I didn't get hit with the Dark Wings again, but I did get a good amount back. So the biggest thing here is just making sure you're keeping an eye on your mana at all times, and keeping your shield up at all times. When it's right to use AoE, such as like when Sigrid is not polymorphed, then that's when you should be using as much AoE as you can. But again, you have to measure that against how much mana you have and how much mana you're going to need in the next couple of steps. So as you may notice, based on my DBM up in the left corner, you'll notice that there are no upcoming mechanics to look out for. And here I messed up my position because I messed up my camera. And that means that once you hit this certain point, I believe it's around 4.5 minutes, you're only going to have to deal with two mechanics, which are or three mechanics I should say, which are the Spears, the Ancestral Knowledge, and Dark Wings. As long as you keep Sigrid polymorph, you won't have to deal with Dark Wings, but do note that it does have a DR, so you can only cast it 3 times before she becomes immune, and you'll have to wait 18 seconds. So in this phase, this is where your mana is going to become ultimately important, and you're going to have to weigh how much mana you have, how you're going to be using your mana, how much damage you can put out, and how much you need to save for your shield. So finding that balance was really hard for me, and it probably has a lot to do with not being that familiar with the spec. So right here you'll notice that I didn't have enough time to put out enough damage and still survive everything, so that's where I used my Ice Block to survive that first Ancestral Knowledge, and then have to go all out on this one to really break the shield. So as you probably notice, I'm staying really low on health for the rest of this fight, and that is because of the fact that once you get to the point where it's just these 3 mechanics that rotate over and over and over, the orbs on the ground that recover your health no longer spawn. So this is why it's extremely valuable to have some sort of passive healing. But at this point in the challenge, it's basically repetitive. You'll be seeing me do the same thing kind of over and over again, so I will just kind of talk about the challenge in general as you watch me do the rest of the fight. It's pretty much the same as it goes on from here. So, things I could have done better is not move around so much. I spend so much time trying to find the best position to stand in that I forget to just stop and cast. Another thing I don't do a very good job of is managing mana. You don't need to be pushing 4 charges all the time, and especially when you get to the end in these final phases where you're just rotating through the same 3 mechanics, you're going to be getting drained all the time from your mana shield. So you're going to be wanting to save a good portion of your mana to just being used for mana shield, especially if you don't have any of the healing legendaries or the shield legendaries. So keep that in mind. Another thing you can do better than what I did is keeping Sigrid polymorphed more often. In my mind, I was constantly saving it for Blood of the Father, which is definitely something that you should do because you want to make sure that polymorph lasts the full duration of Blood of the Father, which is totally understandable. However, once you get into these final phases when you don't have to worry about Blood of the Father anymore, you should be using it as often as you can. Basically, you can do 2 in a row, back to back, without having to worry about the DR too much, and then wait the full 18 seconds for the DR to let that wear off so you get the full duration again on the next cast. But because of the fact that I wasn't keeping her polymorphed, I was having to deal with way more passive damage from her just auto-attacking me, which puts a lot more drain on my mana because of Mana Shield, as well as I'm having to deal with more mechanics than I really need to deal with. It means that I have to dodge the spears as well as the dark wings. If I keep her polymorphed, both of those mechanics I don't have to worry about anymore, and I can just focus on Rune Seer Faljar's Ancestral Knowledge, breaking that shield and getting it interrupted, while still being able to do damage to Sigrid and the rest of the group that way because of their shared health pools. So make sure you're using polymorph, especially in this last phase. There's no reason to hold on to it unless you've already DR'd yourself, in which case you just wait 18 seconds and then use it again. So in conclusion here, there's a lot of things I could have done better, and a lot of things that I would suggest you do, and those are those three things. Not move as much as I did, conserve your mana better, make sure that you're using Mark of Aluneth pretty much on cooldown, use your evocation whenever you're not in fear of getting it interrupted in some way or you having to move, and also make sure that you're polymorphing Sigrid a lot more than I did. Again, you do want to save it for Blood of the Father, it's your only way of preventing that damage, but once those are over, you can use this really freely to save yourself from a lot of extra damage that you really don't have to deal with. But that's pretty much the fight, guys. I hope that you enjoyed this. The video has already run much longer than I wanted it to at this point, so I'm going to go ahead and sign off here. Let me know if you have any comments or questions or anything else in the comments below, and I will try to get back to them the best I can. But that's pretty much it. I'll let the video continue out. However, I don't really have anything else to say at this point. My damage was really low, so it took a much longer time to kill it than it probably should have. But there's really nothing else for me to really cover, so if you'd like to finish watching the kill from here, it's the same stuff you've been seeing over the last couple of minutes. So if you want to see me kill it, feel free, but that's pretty much all I got. So I will see you guys in the next video.